Namaste and welcome back to the JavaScript series. My dear friends, today we are going to be discussing a topic which 9 out of 10 times you will be using it on a daily basis as a developer. And that topic is none other than arrays in JavaScript. There cannot be a single interview that you guys are going to attend where questions on arrays is not asked to you, especially if you are an entry-level engineer trying to find a job. Why is array so important and where do we actually use them is the first question that I would like to answer. Every single programming concept which exists because it solves a problem. What is the problem that arrays solve? Let's have a look at it. Let us assume as a company I have 5 employees working for me. These are the names of the 5 people. Okay? Now I want to store this data or the names of each person inside my JavaScript program. Now, how do you store data inside JavaScript? Using variables. So now what will I do? I will now convert each of these names into strings because names are strings. And what are strings? Double quotes. I'll put each of this data inside double quotes. Now, the first person's name, I'll store it inside a variable. I'll call it as A, let A, right? Now, the problem is one variable can only store one value. If I try to store a different value in A, the previous value will be replaced by the new value and hence I'll lose a person's name and only then I'll be able to store another person's name. So I don't have any other option but to store the second person's name in a different variable B, third person's in C, then D, then E, then F, like that. 5 people, 5 variable names. Understood? Now you may ask, I don't really see any problem here. Well, the problem arises when the data starts to become larger. Now let us assume instead of 5 names, I had 10 names. Now the same concept applies where every single name has to be stored inside a different variable. And hence now I need to remember 10 different unique distinct variable names in my head as a developer to access these names. Now imagine you have 100 people's names to store, 1000 people's names to store. I hope all of you are able to see that if you have 1000 names to store, you will have to create 1000 variables, and that now presents 2 problems. Problem number 1 is that variable creation itself is difficult because you have to create multiple names. You have to come up with unique names, distinct names. The second clear problem that you are going to be witnessing here is that you created the variables, but when you try to access them, you will again face difficulties. Accessing is difficult. What do you mean by accessing is difficult, Rohit, if you ask me? If you have 1000 people's names, each name inside a different variable, and if I ask you the 234th person's age is inside which variable, what is the name of the variable? You will really put yourself in a tough spot because your memory will not be able to pinpoint the name of that variable. You can't remember. Can you remember 1000 people's names? You just can't, right? That is the point I'm trying to make. So these 2 problems keeps arising in a programmer's life whenever they want to store large volumes of data. And hence using the traditional data type approach which we have been using so far, where we create different variables for each piece of data we want to store, this very quickly will start resulting in a scalability issue that these 2 problems will bring. And that is why long back computer scientists came up with a beautiful way to organize and store your data in such a manner that using a single variable name you can access 1000 pieces of data. Confusing? Or are you curious about it? How you can be accessing 1000 people's names using a single variable name? This, my friends, is the magic of arrays. Now, how does arrays solve these problems? Let me show you. Alright, my friends, now let me show you how arrays is the solution for the 2 problems I mentioned previously. Now try to understand, these are those same 5 people's names stored in 5 different variables. Now instead of this, I want to store them inside one single variable. Now that is where arrays comes into the picture. So what I'll do is, I'll ignore all those variables, I'll just keep these 5 people's names. Now watch it, the same 5 people's names, I'll write them sequentially, right? Like I'll write them sequentially. And every name, I will separate them using commas, comma separated, right? Now this sequential comma separated data, I will enclose it within square brackets. This, my dear friends, is an array in JavaScript. And now the beauty is, all these 5 names put together can be assigned to one variable called as ARR. So I'll say let ARR like this. That's it. I hope all of you understood. Am I clear till here? Which means, please try to understand, the biggest advantage is now that all these 5 names can be accessed using a single variable. Now you will be like, how using this variable, I'll be able to access this name, this name, this name, this name, how? I want to individually access. For that, first you must understand the memory point of view. Now, arrays in JavaScript are also objects, are also first-class citizens, which means in JavaScript, you know, during execution, we have our stack segment, we have a heap segment, about which in depth I've explained in the previous classes. Objects are always allocated memory inside the heap. And hence, please watch it. Whenever you see assignment, first you must execute the right-hand side. When the right-hand side executes, JavaScript knows that you're trying to create an array object, and hence inside the heap, it allocates a brand new block of memory, which will also have an address. Now what it is going to do is, it will count that there are 5 pieces of data, and hence this new block of memory will be split into 5 divisions, or technically known as cells. What do we call it as? Cells. Cells of an array. Alright? Now inside each of these cells, it is going to put this data, which means Rohit comes here, Megha comes here, Shilpa comes here, Somana comes here, Divya comes here. Right? And now for each of the cell, inside which you have one piece of data, a positional value is assigned. And this positional value always starts from 0 and goes till 4. So if you have 5 pieces of data, 0 to 4. You have 10 pieces of data, 0 to 9. In technical words, we call these positional values as array indexes. What do we call it as? Index. Index of an array. Understood? Now, this object must have a reference. That reference is only ARR. And references are created on the stack. This address comes and sits inside here. This is referring to this, which means this is essentially how an array looks. Understood what I'm trying to say? Now, very, very simply put, let us assume you want to access the first piece of data. Now, how do you access it? That's quite simple. The name is only one, ARR, but the positions are many. And at which positional value or index do you have, Rohit? 0. And hence, if you want to access this piece of data, you should say ARR of 0, as I'm showing here. Next piece of data, ARR of 1, ARR of 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. Hope you understand. So, if you have 100 pieces of data, and if I ask you where is the 57th person's data stored, you don't have to remember multiple variable names. Variable name is ARR only. If I want the 57th person, you will say ARR of 56. If there are 1000 people and I ask you where is the 573rd person, you will say ARR of 572. In split second, you can remember and access, which is the primary purpose for which arrays were invented, created. I hope you're able to understand. The same thing, my friend, is what I would like to just write some code now and show you. Okay, so watch it. In my editor now, I will just say let ARR equal to, and within square brackets, I will put these 5 pieces of data separated by commas. Now, very simple. If I were to now go here and say console.log, and let us assume I want to access Rohit. How will you access Rohit? ARR of 0. That's about it. How am I going to access Megha? ARR of 1. Next Shilpa, ARR of 2. Next Soms, ARR of 3. Next Divya, ARR of 4. I hope you're able to see that. And let me just remove this. Understood what I'm trying to say? Now if in case I were to go to my console and I were to execute this code, one by one you've been able to access. Now some of you will be like, what if I go and just say ARR? Just I will say ARR. Understood? Now if I execute, you can see it prints the entire array out for you. I hope you're able to understand. Now, the beauty about arrays is, they can store any type of data. So I can have 5 strings or I can have 5 numbers also. And I have taught you data types in JavaScript in depth before. So the point being very simple, that here I can now go remove all of this and now say 10, 20, 30, 40.5, 47.89 like this. Right? Now if in case I go clear the screen and I were to execute it, it is able to store number data also. It will be able to store string data also. Right? It can store any data. And the data need not be of the same type. It can store sequentially any combination of data. So for example, let us assume I will go here and I will say, listen, first piece of data is the name of a person. Second piece of data is the height of a person. Third piece of data is probably the weight of the person. Right? The next piece of data, does the person have a passport? Yes, the person has a passport. True. The next piece of data, is the person employed? Yes. Or for example, what is the company that the person is running? I'll go here and I will say Tap Academy like this. So you can see one string. This is one, again number, this is boolean, this is a string. So you can see there are different pieces of data. Now if I were to go here, clear the screen and I were to execute it, or it is telling, hey listen, true is not defined. So I think I need to make it lowercase. And now if I execute, you can see it, because it's case sensitive. Boolean values can't be starting with uppercase. That was a typo. I hope all of you understood. So point being, whenever in JavaScript you want to store a collection of data sequentially, one after the other, and you want to access them using a single variable, please go for arrays. This is the most simplest way I could have introduced arrays for you. But arrays are used extensively for a variety of different purposes, and we are going to deep dive into arrays the way you have never learnt before. So make sure to follow every part of this series in detail, and trust me, after that, whether you're a beginner or an intermediate or an advanced level JavaScript developer, there is something for everybody in this array series. And now let's go forward and understand more things about arrays. So let us assume, before I show you all the fancy things that you can do with an array, let us assume that I want to create an empty array like this, whose size is 5. It's an empty array. After creating this empty array of size 5, then as and when I want, I should be able to add elements one by one inside this. Now how do we do that? Because in the previous iteration, I showed you that we created an array and already populated it with data. Now I just want an empty array. Very simple way to do this is using something called as the array constructor. And this word constructor will I'll give you 100% clarity on this topic when I take up a concept called as encapsulation and when I teach you object orientation in depth. But as of today, please try to understand, if I say new, and if in case I say array like this, right? Now using this syntax, I'll be able to create an array of my desired size. The size of the array is what you should be mentioning within these parentheses. If you say new array of 5, automatically JavaScript will create an array whose size is 5. Naturally, this is an object, you need to give it a reference. I'll go here and I am going to give this a reference. I'll call it as let ARR like this, same. Now that is ARR. Understood? Now this is an empty array. Now if you want, one by one, my friends, you can be storing data. Okay? Example, now in ARR of 1, I will probably be storing 10, in which case 10 gets stored. Next, similarly, if in case I duplicate this line and say in ARR of 2, I want to store 20. Similarly, I want to store 30 in ARR of 3. Similarly, I want to store 40 in ARR of 5. Similarly, I want to store in, let's make it 0, 1, 2, 3, and 4, because all of you know that the index of an array starts from 0. So ARR of 0 till 4. Understood? One by one, I'm storing data. Now if in case you want to print this data one by one, Then you have to say console.log, and then how do you access the first piece of data? ARR of 0. I hope you remember. Similarly, ARR of 1, then 2, then 3, then 4, like this. 5 pieces of data, 0 to 4. I hope you understood. Now, if you want proof that really this has happened, I'll go here, and if in case I execute, you can see 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. So what I showed you here is that using something called as an array constructor, you can create an array of your desired size. And after creation, you can initialize it with your required data. And then you can access it. I hope you're able to understand. But one look at this code, a person will understand or will see there is one problem. The problem is, I have an array of size 5. Now please try to understand, to have an array of size 5 and then initialize it with data, I had to write 5 lines of code. So if my array size is 5, 5 lines of code to initialize data. And then to print the elements one by one, I had to write 5 lines of code. Which clearly says that if my size of my array was 10, then I would have had 10 lines of code for initialization, 10 lines of code for printing, which cumulatively brings the size of my array to around, the code size to 10 plus 10, 20 lines of code just to store data and print it. If in case it was 100, then 100 plus 100, 200 lines of code. If it was 1000, 2000 lines of code. Trust me, nobody who calls themselves as a programmer will write code like this. There are other words which people will be using for you. Any which ways, my dear friend, jokes aside, this is not how we utilize arrays, because as the size increases, the number of unnecessary lines increases. But if you are a student of TAP Academy and you've been following these series, then you know that one look at it, you can see same code statement is repeating again and again. Same statement is repeating. Whenever we have a set of statements which is repeating, we should not repeat it by physically typing it out. Instead, we have to type it out once and make the JavaScript engine repeat it for us as many times as required, which is the fundamental concept of loops. Which means obviously this is a best scenario for me to apply loops. That is why I keep saying arrays and loops are two concepts which always are used together, because without it being used together with loops, arrays becomes inefficient in terms of code. Now let me show you the different ways in which you can loop over an array. You can iterate over an array. Alright my friend, now let me show you how we can use loops along with arrays and perform iteration over arrays. Now, I've already stored my values inside this. This also can be converted into a loop, but I'll show that to you later, right? Where you're taking input from the user and storing it one by one. But right now, I want to convert this into a loop where I'm looping over an array which is already initialized with the data and just printing it one by one. So try to understand. How I'm going to do this is, I'm not going to write it multiple times. I'll just tell it once. Now this part, I'll just cut it. Now, those of you who've been attending the class regularly, you know how loops work. If you don't know, I highly encourage you to go back and have a look at the loops discussion I've had. I'll create a looping variable which I will call as I, right? Let us assume this is only I. So I'll tell, hey, listen, I, you should start from 0, you should go all the way till 4, and every time you are at a particular element's index, I want you to print it. Then move on to the next, 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 and once you hit 4, you must stop. This is the foundational concept of a loop. So how I'll do that is, I'll write the syntax of my for loop in JavaScript, which looks something like this. I'll put 2 semicolons here, and first I will tell I, you should start from 0, because index starts from 0. Next I will tell, hey, listen, I, maximum you should go till 4, which I can also say as less than 5, because less than 5 is also 4. Next what I will do is I'll tell, every time you finish printing an element at an index, move only to the next index. So move by one step. So I will tell I plus plus like this, because plus plus means incrementation, right? Now I will go inside this and basically I will paste whatever I had copied, which is this printing line, right? Now if you focus, see how this loop will work. I will start from 0. Then at 0th element, you are going to print ARR of 0. Then I will go to 1, but still you're printing ARR of 0. Then I'll go to 2, again you're printing ARR of 0, which means though this will loop over the array, every time you're going to be printing the first element itself. That is a mistake. And hence anybody with eyes can see that the 0 has to be replaced with a value of I that I currently holds, right? Now, how does this work, right? For that, let me just bring this flow chart here for your reference so that you can understand what I'm saying correctly. So you can clearly notice, right? First thing that happens in a for loop is we start the execution. That is this part, we start. Then we initialize I to 0. That is the first initialization part. After that, we check a condition. Now, what is the condition that we are checking? The condition can only evaluate to either true or false. True if I is really less than 5, false if I is greater than or equal to 5. In this case, 100% because I is 0, it evaluates to true, in which case I will come inside and print the value of I, and the value of I right now is 0, so ARR of 0, I will be printing 10. After this, after I print the element, I will be incrementing the value of I plus plus. So now I from 0 would have become 1. After incrementation, I should again be going and checking the condition. Again, when I check the condition, I will check if I is less than 5. Yes, I is less than 5. I will come inside and print ARR of I. In this case, I is 1, hence I will print 20. After that, same story, again increment, check condition, print, increment, check condition, print. Like that, I is 0, it works, 1 it works, 2 it works, 3 it works, 4 it works. But when the next time I increment and I becomes 5, when I check condition, I will not be less than 5, I is equal to 5, and hence I end the loop and I come outside. But in general, I would have been able to iterate over the elements of the loop, and that same proof is what I am giving you here. If in case I were to execute it, you can see 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, it is printing it one by one. Now the advantage here is, if my array size was 500, still my code would be the same because it will just be I less than 500. If my array size was say 50,000, then also my code will be the same. I just have to change this to less than 50,000. And that is the power of loop. It compresses your code, it packs your code up, right? So that you don't have to keep repeating by typing the same statements out time and again, right? Wonderful. So this is one way to iterate over arrays using the for loop, okay? One more way to iterate over the array is by making use of something called as a for of loop. What is it called as? For of loop. What is that? Let me show you. My friends, I also would like to show you that using a for loop, you can not only iterate over an array in the forward direction, you can also iterate in the reverse direction. For example, if I want to iterate over the array in a reverse direction, then I should be starting at the ending of the array. In this case, it is 4, right? So one way to do it is, I can go here and say, hey, listen, you should start from 4. Another thing to note here is that it should start from 4 and end at 0, which means now the condition can't be less than 5. It should be if it is greater than or equal to 0. Because please understand, 4 is greater than 0. 3 is greater than 0, 2 is greater than 0, 1 is greater than 0, 0 is equal to 0, and after that if I go, I'll reach -1, and that obviously is not greater than or equal to 0, it's lesser than, and hence it stops. Now please tell me, should I value increment or decrement? Should it increase or decrease? Obviously it has to decrease, and that is why I have to make this as I minus minus. And now if I were to show you the output, let me clear the screen and re-execute, you got 50, 40, 30, 20, 10. I hope you understood what I'm trying to say. That's great. So the point is, if you use your traditional for loop, you can iterate in the forward direction, you can iterate in the reverse direction, understood? You can probably also go every alternate element. So let us assume every time instead of decrementing the value of I by say 1, you can do it by 2, right? You can do it by 3. You can multiply it by 2. I want you to change this and experiment. Everything I'll not spoon feed you, otherwise you will not become developers. But point is, you can have bilateral iterations, or you can have both ways iteration, right? Forward and backwards. Wonderful. Now what I want to show you is, let us assume, what is this 4, friends? What is this 4? Why did you write this 4? This 4 is the last index of the array. That's why you said 4. Now let us assume you want to automatically calculate whatever is going to be the last index. Instead of typing it, you want it to be calculated during execution. How do you do it? Very simple. It is using a variable called as length. Now listen to my words carefully. Arrays are objects, right? Which means I'll just represent it like an object like this. Every object in JavaScript will have properties and behaviors, will have data types and methods or functions, will have variables and functions. Variables is technically called as properties. So I'm just making a partition here. These are the properties. There are two properties inside every array object. One is called as name, other is called as length. Name will obviously be whatever is the name you have given for the array. In this case, it is ARR. But length, my friends, will be the total length of the array. How many, what is the size of this array? 5. That 5 will come and sit. Which means now if you want to know what is the size of this array, you can say ARR.length. ARR.length. And those of you who focused on my object orientation, you know how to do this. ARR.length. And hence, instead of me telling 4 here, I will say ARR.length minus 1. Because what is ARR of length? 5. But what do I want? 4. 5 minus 1. That's it. Understood what I'm trying to say? Now if in case I were to do this and I were to go here, clear the screen and re-execute, you got the same output. Same thing you can do in the forward direction also. I will say, hey listen, I should be starting from 0. Next I will tell I less than equal to, less than, or what were you saying? Less than, and you were saying 5, correct? Then you went till 4. Now how to get that 5? ARR.length. So instead of 5 I will tell ARR.length. And instead of minus minus I will be telling plus plus. And now if in case I go here, clear the screen and I were to execute forward direction. So remember this length concept, okay? Great, awesome. If this much is clear to all of you, then let me show you the next way. An easier way to iterate over arrays. A more efficient way to iterate over arrays. Now what is this? This is called as a for-off loop. This is called as a for-off loop. Now to understand this for-off loop, what I will do is, this traditional for loop I will remove, this I will remove. And let me remove all this object representation and all that, because anyways you guys have understood all this. Now try to understand, my aim is very simple. In the forward direction, I want to access every element in the array one by one. For this you have something called as for-off loop, which is a much easier syntax. I will say for, just like a for loop. But there is no need for a looping variable, no need for I, no need for condition check, no need for incrementation, no need for decrementation. Instead, inside this for loop I will tell, hey listen, I want to access the elements of an array called as ARR. I want to access the elements of an array called as ARR. And what I will tell is, every time please go pick one element from my array and give it to me. When it gives it to me, where will I store it? I will be storing it inside one variable called as x. It can be x, y, z, whatever. Pick the element, give it to x. Now how will I tell that? Give it to x, very simple. Left side of off I will come and say let x. That's it. So to a beginner this may seem very confusing, but it's very simple. I want to iterate over the elements of an array called as ARR. Pick one element from the array, give it to x. And if I do this the first time, see how this loop works? First time it will check, is the array empty? No, it is not empty. Are there elements? Yes, great. Now it will pick the first element and it will give it to x. So x will have 10. Now what I will do is, I'll just go here and I will say console.log and I will print the value of x, and console spelling is wrong. Yeah, understood? Great. After using the value of x, next it will automatically go pick the next element and give it to x. Previous element gets replaced by the new element. Print it. Again next element will be given, print it. Next element will be given, print it. Next element will be given, print it. I don't have to check any condition, I don't need initialization, I don't need incrementation, decrementation. Automatically it begins from the first element, goes to the last element. Really, will this happen? Watch it. If in case I execute 10, 20, 30, 40, 50. Simple, easy way to make use of or loop over arrays. But of course, it has its own disadvantages. Example is, you don't have a lot of control here. It will always start from beginning and go till ending. You can't now change it to go from ending to beginning. So the traversal is only in the forward direction, not in the reverse direction. Next thing is, every time from one element, it will go to the next element only. You can't probably jump elements. You can't go through alternate elements. You can't apply some mathematical operation and say, every time increment by 3, increment by 2, all that you can't do. But in most cases, when you just want to quickly iterate over an array, pick every element one by one, make use of the for of loop. I hope you understood this, and having said this, I hope in today's class you have understood the fundamental use case of an array, you understood how to create it, you understood the different ways to create it, and most importantly you understood how to iterate over it, which now forms the foundation that I required to teach you arrays. Now I will be deep diving into this concept and I'll show you some amazing things one can be doing with arrays. As usual, if you enjoyed today's class, don't forget to like, subscribe and comment, and I will see you in the next class. Take care. Bye-bye.